This is continuing coverage and the trial of Richard Merritt from the Hidden Killers podcast on the True Crime Today network.
Bring them in.
Sure. We had the hearing yesterday regarding, or a couple of days ago, regarding the flyer that was placed in Mr. Cody's mailbox. My understanding was that we were going to revisit that. I think that Your Honor was leaning toward letting it in, but said the defendant had to connect the dots first.
Well, I think they would do that once they have her on cross, if he's intending to introduce it through her.
Yes. However, she has no direct knowledge of the flyer ending up in Shirley's mailbox. So I think it would be hearsay to allow that information to be admitted.
Okay.
I think she can say that she received it, but I'm going to object to them asking whether Shirley did.
Okay. Well, if she doesn't have personal knowledge of that, she can say so.
Okay.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Anything else? You know, when I'm asking these questions, it's not a trick question. I'm just trying to make sure I don't have to keep sending them in and out. So, okay. All right. Okay, you bring the jury out. Why don't you ask Miss Manicozy to come back in, please? Ms. Manicozy, you understand you're still under oath, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Queen.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, Dr. Manicozy.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
And then you and I, we never met personally. We have chatted on a couple occasions, correct?
We have.
Okay. And Dr. Manicozy, let me draw your attention back to January 2019. Let's talk about January 2019. Let's start there, and then we'll go backwards and forwards, okay? Now, back in January 2019, basically, Richard's case was ongoing, and he was about to enter a plea, correct? Is that a yes?
You mean right before his bench trial?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. And back in January 2019 and 2018, this fraud case up in Cobb County, it was a big deal, correct?
Right.
And it was a big deal because especially not only was it that it involved 34 counts, tens of victims, but it was in the county which you and Richard lived at the time, correct?
Correct.
And because I believe at the time you and Richard were living in Smyrna.
Right.
Okay. And it was a big deal because also involved elderly people, correct?
Right.
And involved the loss of hundreds of thousands of dollars, correct?
Right.
And at this time, tensions were kind of high up there in the area where you and Richard were living, correct?
Correct.
And I think some people even called it sort of like a lynch mob after your husband, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And leading up to him entering the plea, even though you and Richard weren't together, you were concerned and a bit nervous about the whole situation.
I wasn't nervous about the situation. I was mortified that the whole world knew what I had been through. I wasn't scared. I'm not exactly sure what you're asking me.
But you were concerned, correct? You were concerned about the world and what they were thinking.
Yes.
And then you were maybe a little concerned that maybe somebody was, or some person or someone was following you?
No, never.
And didn't someone come up to your job at some point in time regarding the case?
Nobody came up to my job. When Richard was first arrested, one of the victims called and told my boss what he had done. I was never worried about being followed or anything like that.
It didn't bother you that people were calling your job to talk about your husband?
It bothered me because I was embarrassed that the whole world knew what my husband had done. Rich and I were very prominently known in the community, so that's why it bothered me. I was never scared. I was mortified.
Okay. And then, of course, I know on one occasion, you were at least somewhat concerned because you did get a flyer, a cartoon in your mailbox, correct?
I remember the cartoons in my mailbox.
Okay. And did you discuss those with Richard?
Yes.
Did you discuss those with Shirley?
Yes.
Okay. And to your knowledge, did Shirley get the same flyer?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, this is eliciting hearsay.
So yes or no, I'm not asking what Shirley may have said.
Okay.
And to your knowledge, did Shirley get that same flyer?
Yes, the flyers were put in her mailbox as well.
Okay. So I'm going to show you what's marked as defense exhibit number 1. Very close, Judge?
Yes.
Is that the flyer which you're speaking of?
Yes.
And is that a true and accurate copy of the flyer which you received in your mailbox and your understanding Ms. Mayer also received?
Well, I did not see the ones that Shirley received.
Fair enough. Is that the one which
This
you
is
received?
the one that was in my mailbox.
And the one you discussed with Shirley?
Yes.
This time we'll move to introduce defense exhibit number 1.
Any objection?
Can I look at it for one moment, please? Oh, is this just a copy? No objection.
Admitted.
Madam Judge, am I published?
Yes.
And this is the flyer, a copy of the flyer which you received in your mailbox. And do you recall when it was in relationship to the day in which Richard was sentenced?
I don't remember what day it was. It's been quite a while, but I do recall it was right before his bench trial, if I'm correct in remembering that.
Now you said bench trial. Was there a trial, or was it actually the day in which there was a long sentencing hearing?
The day of the sentencing hearing. I'm sorry, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if I'm saying the right
That's
thing.
fair enough. You're a doctor.
The day that he was sentenced. This was right before the day he was sentenced.
Because apparently it looks like here at the top, tune in January 18, 2019 for another edition of Georgia Cobb County Justice, titled Will, Flournoy Fix Again. Who's Flournoy? You have any idea who Flournoy is?
That was the judge.
And then this mention here of, Judge, you never know, I'm a repeat offender, and I violated my bond twice. I'm a bad, bad boy. I know you'll go easy on me. And that was some of the language on the flyer.
That's what I'm reading on the flyer.
Then, of course, we have a comment here. Ask DA Margaret, hey, who cares about the elderly? We take care of our own. How do I look with a hairpiece? I'm such a tool. I guess there's some of the commentary somebody put on this flyer that you see.
Yes.
And there appears to be some comment here about DA Reynolds and also about the judge in the case.
That's what I'm reading.
Yes. And that's what you received. Now, did that cause you, again, did it cause you any concern?
I was not happy about it because I didn't want the victims to confront me because I felt so bad that they thought I was an accomplice. I was upset that they knew where I lived because I was afraid they were going to try to talk to me and not accept my apologies for him. I was never afraid of them. I just thought, oh, they know where I live. Are they going to come talk to me? Just like Inside Edition was in my front yard and they were trying to talk to me. I didn't want to be involved in any way. So that's why I was unhappy that the flyers were in my mailbox. I was not afraid.
Now, excuse me, didn't mean to interrupt. But that day, isn't it true that you took your son out of school that day?
I don't remember. If I did take him out of school that day, it was probably because everyone at his school was talking to him about it and he was emotionally traumatized.
Fair enough. And also, isn't it true that you contacted Cobb County Police regarding what was going on?
I don't remember exactly if I told the police.
Okay. And what about the Cobb County DA's office? You recall reaching out to them?
I had been in touch with one of the investigators at the Cobb County DA's office,
And
so I'm sure I talked to her.
And you were in touch with her because you plan to offer evidence against Richard or because of your own concerns about being involved in any way?
I was in touch with her all along because I tried to aid in his conviction. So I gave her his computer, some materials that were in the storage space of our house. I talked to her and gave her information about Richard to help with his conviction. I never talked to her because I was afraid in any way for myself or my family.
And then as you I believe you already told us, on the day in which Richard earned his plea, sounds like you weren't there for most of the hearing, correct?
Right.
You were there when he did, though, finally enter a plea of guilty and was sentenced to, I believe you said 30 to 15, correct?
Right.
Okay. And you weren't there, but of course that day, Shirley was there.
No, Shirley was not there.
She wasn't there the day of sentencing? You sure?
I don't remember. We're coming up on 4.5 years. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't remember if she was sitting in the courtroom that day. I don't remember.
Okay. And so let's talk about Shirley for a minute. As you mentioned, Shirley was a wonderful grandmother.
Yes.
As you said, Shirley cared about her grandkids immensely.
Yes.
And Shirley cared about Richard immensely also.
He was her son. She did.
Okay.
She obviously cared about him. She was the only one that stuck by him.
Correct. Because as you've told us, you and Richard met, I believe, around 94, correct?
Right.
When y'all were UGA, and then y'all got married around about 99, correct?
Right.
So we're talking 20 years in which you and Richard were together, 20 years in which Shirley was a part of not just Richard's life, but your life.
Right.
And during those 20 years, as you mentioned, Shirley gave not just to her grandkids, but she gave a lot to her son.
Yes.
And oftentimes, you know, as a good mother, she helped take care of him when basically he couldn't take care of himself.
Right.
And as you said, when you guys were in school, I guess you were in school, he wasn't a lawyer yet, and it's tough, basically, to rising professionals, and she gave money to you.
Right.
And as you mentioned, when Richard was trying to get on his feet, she gave money to help support his practice. Correct?
She did a lot to help him, and they fought a lot in spite of that.
And as you mentioned, she gave a lot, but it sounds like there was sort of a underlying understanding that she wasn't really looking for stuff in return. Correct?
I don't think she expected him to pay her back.
Correct. So, but then you mentioned that there were times, I believe your word was, they could be contentious.
Yes.
Now, is it fair to say Shirley, she was a kind and gracious lady, but she was also a strong lady.
She was a firecracker.
Good way of putting it. And she was strong-willed.
Yes.
And your husband, he was kind of strong-willed also.
Kind of.
And the two of them, right, you said they could butt heads.
Yes, they butted heads a lot.
About simple stuff.
About a lot of things. Oh, so many things.
Okay. However, though they would argue, there never was any fights or any physical violence between either one of them, was there?
There was never anything physical, no.
Okay. And regardless of your feelings about Richard, he did not have a reputation for being a violent man, did he?
No, but he had a very, very scary temper.
Okay. But as you said, he did not have a reputation for physical violence, correct?
He was physically violent with me once.
Tell us about it. What year was that?
I don't remember what year it was. It was somewhere towards the end of our marriage, the last couple of years, I do recall. But we had an argument and we were in our bedroom and he pushed me to the ground and I hit my head on the bed.
And actually, the two of you pushed each other?
No, he pushed me and I hit my head. He pushed me down. I didn't do anything.
And did you call police?
No.
Did you make a report?
No, because I was scared of what he would do if I reported it.
Did you file for divorce?
Not at that time.
Because as you told us, days after he gets arrested for fraud, within 5 days, you filed for divorce, correct?
Because of what he did to me and to all those people that I found out about.
Because pretty much he defrauded them, correct? And because of his actions, he took your life away.
He ruined our lives.
Correct.
And that's why I divorced him.
Because as you mentioned to us, you said that you guys lived life as, I guess, during those 18 or so good years, that you lived, I think your term was jet setters. Correct?
We were a doctor and a lawyer. We were doing fun things. Absolutely.
Doctor and lawyer traveling, correct?
Yes.
Having parties,
Yes.
correct? Basically, you had the kids. I understand Jack was in football, correct? Sometime.
Jack was in a lot of sports.
He was in baseball, correct?
Right.
He was in fishing.
Yes.
He was doing golf.
Yes.
And doing a lot of that, his dad, Richard, was right there, correct?
He was there for those activities.
And then even with Mia, with her disability, often he would take her on walks, correct?
He didn't do things with Mia as often.
Didn't he go swimming with her?
We would go to the pool sometimes and go swimming. He never assisted in her custodial care that she required as a disabled person. I did all of that by myself, and he never came with me to her doctor appointments, except for the one on the day of the murder. I did much of Mia's care by myself. We went out to dinner. We did things as a family before the very end when his behavior changed, when he started drinking very heavily and showing us the temper that was very scary.
Now you mentioned that, and I haven't seen a single report where you mentioned that that was an issue in your relationship, correct?
I didn't talk about it because it was very scary. It happened probably in the couple of months before he was arrested, and he told me later he knew he was about to be arrested because he knew he was going to get caught, and that was when he started coming home very, very drunk and angry. His temper scared us very badly. There was one night where Jack and I were looking for somewhere to run and hide, but Mia was upstairs sleeping and we couldn't wake her up and we didn't want to leave her.
Now, that is a good story. You've never mentioned that in any of the statements you made to the DA, correct?
I told the DA that he was angry and had a drinking problem.
You never mentioned that to the Cobb County DA, correct?
I told them that he had a drinking problem.
You never mentioned that to the judge in Cobb County, correct?
To the judge in Cobb County? No, I don't recall talking to the judge in Cobb County.
You never mentioned to the Cobb County police when they came and spoke with you after the incident, correct?
That he would drank a lot and had a temper?
Yes, you never mentioned any of that to any of those persons up until you knew you would be called as a witness in this case, correct?
I never mentioned it to anybody because it was so scary. And honestly, I blocked a lot of it out because I was so traumatized by everything that he had put us through. And I was talking to Jack recently, and he reminded me of some of those events.
So now you have, I guess, a recent recollection, correct?
I've been working on it intensely in therapy, and a lot of the trauma that I've been through has surfaced later as I've dealt with the years of trauma that he put me through.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Mendoza. Back during the good days, pre-2018, you and your husband went to many events, correct?
Correct.
And during those times, during those many events, how would Richard introduce you?
What do you mean?
As his wife, as his
Yes.
girlfriend, as Dr. Mendoza? How would he introduce you?
Wife.
As his wife, correct?
Yes, I was his wife. He introduced me as his wife.
And he would introduce you as being Dr. Mendoza, correct?
Well, he would never call me, "This is my wife, Dr. Minicozy." He would
But he
say,
would tell
"This
everybody
is
you
my
were a
wife,
doctor."
Shanique." Yeah, he would tell people I was a doctor.
You tell me you're a doctor. And likewise, when you met people and you introduced them to Richard, he would say, "This is my husband, Richard," correct?
Yes.
And you would say, "This is my husband, Richard. He's an attorney," correct?
If people ask what he did for a living, sure.
Yeah. Because like today, you mentioned to Ms. Pott here that he became a lawyer after failing the bar 2 times.
3 times.
Right. Is that something you used to mention about your husband before all this?
No, I didn't, but I mentioned it because Ms. Pott asked me what Shirley had done to help us and when she had given us money. And so I said that there was a while that it took him to pass the bar where we needed financial help, and Shirley was the one that helped us. That is the only reason I said it took him a while to pass the bar.
And of course, one of the reasons is, let's be honest, at this point in time, you hate Richard.
Of course.
Okay. Now, let's talk about that Thursday before the incident. You were telling us that you met up with Richard, and you and Jack and Mia met up with Richard that Thursday before, correct?
That night, we met in the Starbucks parking lot by my house so he could say goodbye to the kids.
Well, also that night, isn't that the night in which Richard and Jack went to Longhorns for dinner?
I believe they did, yeah.
Okay. And then you and Mia met up with Jack and Richard and had some Starbucks.
Right.
And he said goodbyes.
We just met in the parking lot for him to return Jack to me, and then they said goodbye for the last time. Yes, that is what happened.
And then that Friday, you mentioned to us how Richard had met y'all at the doctor's appointment, correct?
Right.
And you were aware that at that time, Richard was on that ankle monitor, correct?
Right.
And I'm not sure, were you aware that he had an 8 a.m. curfew where you couldn't even leave the house before 8 a.m.?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I knew that, if I remember correctly.
So Richard's living in Stone Mountain with his mother. He can't leave the house till 8, and the appointment's up in Sandy Springs, correct?
Right.
And being a longtime resident of Atlanta, you know that's not a great commute on a Friday morning, correct?
Right.
Okay. Because you mentioned that Richard was late. And that's not surprising that somebody would be late traveling that distance, right?
We're all late when we try to leave at rush hour to go places.
Okay, agreed.
I didn't think that was weird.
You didn't think it was weird. So you didn't think it was weird that Richard showed up late to the appointment up there in Sandy Springs, right?
The fact that he was late is not what was weird about that appointment.
Right. Now you said Richard seemed different, correct?
Yes.
And of course, you know that's the day that Richard was supposed to be able to turn himself into jail and serve prison time, right?
Right.
And now you said he was different and he wasn't very talkative, correct?
Right.
But at the conclusion of that appointment, isn't Richard the one that took Mia to the car?
That is not true. At the conclusion of that appointment, the doctor said, Janine, let me walk you to your car, because he didn't like the way Richard's aura was and his behavior. So Mia's doctor walked me to my car out through the employee entrance and stood with me until we safely got in the car and drove away. Richard did not walk me to my car. The doctor did not allow it.
And you say Richard wasn't even there at that point in time?
He went to wherever he had parked and left.
Okay.
I went alone with the doctor who insisted on escorting me to my car.
And of course, at that time, you didn't call police, correct?
No.
You didn't make any type of report of him acting strange or being scary, correct?
No, I knew he was about to go to prison and not be my problem.
Now, it sounded like you thought that maybe Shirley had posted Richard's bond by putting up the house, correct?
Yes.
And as you said, you're not a lawyer, correct?
No, I'm not a lawyer.
And you weren't involved in that transaction at all, correct?
No.
And of course, it's not surprising you that actually he posted bond through a bonding company, correct?
Right.
Okay. Because, of course, as you said, Shirley helped facilitate him getting out of jail.
She's the one who got him out of jail. I don't understand everything about how bonding works and how she came up with the money, but I know that Shirley is the one who got him out of jail, and she is the reason that he was bonded out.
Correct. And you may tell us about that Friday. That evening, you said Richard's prior lawyer, Mr. Willingham, contacted you because Richard hadn't turned himself in.
He
Correct?
called me at work half an hour after Richard was supposed to have reported to see if I had heard from him, and I said no.
And of course, you hadn't heard from Richard. And at that point in time, I believe you told us that you did not reach out to Mike that night. You spoke to Mike the next day, correct?
I believe so. We were very upset and concerned because Jack was not with us and Richard was missing. So I actually don't remember if I talked to Mike Friday night or Saturday morning. Like I said, we're coming up on 4.5 years, and there are some details of that day that I don't remember exactly. And it was all very stressful and traumatic. So I'm just not entirely sure about some of those details.
Okay. Now let's go back to like 2018. Richard gets arrested and Shirley posts his bond, correct?
It took a few months, if I recall.
Mm-hmm. She gets him out on bond. He's on the ankle monitor. And during this time, the divorce is in progress, right? And during this time, you and Richard, I guess somewhat begrudgingly, are corresponding on a regular basis, correct?
Out of necessity so that we could get divorced.
Well, so you get divorced also so he could see the kids, right?
I did let him see the kids. For quite some time, my son refused to see him. At first, Jack wouldn't see his father because he was too upset.
But at some point in time, as you said, you facilitated Richard being able to see the kids weekly, bi-weekly on a regular basis, correct?
I allowed that, absolutely.
Because at that time, you didn't have concerns about Mia's or Jack's well-being, correct?
At that time, I didn't know he was capable of murder, but at the time of his arrest in January 18, I didn't know he was capable of hurting elderly people. There was a lot I didn't know about him.
Well, now you say all that, because obviously, as you've already told us, you hate Richard, but you don't know what happened, correct?
I don't know what happened when.
You don't know what happened with the criminal case in Cobb County, and you don't know what happened that day in Stone Mountain.
The day of the murder?
Correct, because you weren't there, right?
No, I was not there during the time that she was supposed that she was murdered.
Nothing further.
Any redirect?
All right, so Janine, Mr. Queen described a lynch mob. Can you describe that a little bit further?
They were not a physical lynch mob. They bonded together and they were very, very upset and angry and hurt. He was never afraid of them. He very often would say,
No, we're going to object.
I'm just trying to define.
Hold on. What's the basis of your objection?
Because she asked about the
Hold on, Mr. Queen. Start over with the basis of your objection, because Ms. Duhan can only take down one of us talking at a time, so I'm trying to make sure we have an accurate record.
Sure, Judge. At this point in time now, the answer is non-responsive to the question. And also, now she's speculating on his frame of mind.
Ms. Potts,
Your Honor.
ask a more specific question.
Okay.
I was confused about what you meant by lynch mob.
Okay. Well, I am as well, and that's why I'm asking that question. Mr. Queen used that term. Is that a term that you would use?
No.
How would you describe the victims of the defendant from the Cobb County case?
Hurt and angry and upset and betrayed.
And can you say what their average age was?
They were older people.
Okay. And were they in general business owners or, were these, can you go further and elaborate who these folks were?
They were ordinary people who needed help. I don't know what they did for a living, but they were people that trusted him, that needed his help, that he hurt.
Did you ever receive any threats after the defendant was charged in Cobb County?
I was never threatened by anybody.
Are you aware of any threats that the defendant received?
No.
Okay. And are you aware of any threats that Shirley Merritt or any other family member received?
No, nobody was threatened.
Okay. And did anyone ever stalk you are you aware of ever being stalked?
No, I wasn't stalked to my knowledge, and I wasn't worried about it either.
Did you ever believe that you were being followed?
No.
Okay. And did the defendant ever mention to you that he felt that he was being followed?
No.
Okay. Did he ever express any fear of these individuals that he had stolen money from?
No, he talked about them and said things about them, but fear was never an emotion that he conveyed.
What did he say?
He said a lot of them were crazy.
Okay.
And
the cartoon, this cartoon that the defense has presented as Defense Exhibit 1. Do you consider any of this to be a threat?
no,
What do you consider it to be?
I consider it to be the victims lampooning the whole situation.
Okay. All right. You mentioned that the defendant had a scary temper. Can you describe what you mean by that?
Rage. When he was drunk, he would go into a rage.
Okay. And how would he act?
Just screaming, cornering me, yelling, scaring the children.
And you said that was when he was drinking. Did he always drink?
He always drank, and he always drank a lot. We used to drink together during the days when we partied. I myself am in recovery, and I've been sober for a long time. Towards the end, and by the end I mean the time where he admitted he knew he was about to be arrested, he was driving home so drunk that he couldn't get out of his car once he got into the garage. We would find him lying on the floor outside. He was drinking to that extent. On the nights that he drank that much and he was able to come inside, he would be in a rage, screaming at us, and honestly just screaming about anything and everything.
And how did he treat his mother?
I would call him ungrateful to her for all the things that she had done for him.
What do you mean?
He fought with her all the time and was annoyed by her all the time and didn't act like he appreciated all the things that she did for him. She's the only one that stuck by him after his arrest.
And did you ever witness him yelling at her or speaking in a demeaning way toward her?
All the time.
What kinds of things would he say?
He would just tell her to butt out of his life and this isn't your business. And there's a lot of their interaction I wasn't witness to, but I was aware every time he was mad at her, and he was mad at her a lot.
How did you learn of the Cobb County charges?
When the day that he was arrested on January 31st of 2018, I got a call from David Willingham, who's the lawyer that he hired, to let me know your husband's been arrested and this is why and this is what happened.
Did you ever withhold either of the children from the defendant?
No.
One additional question. What kind of vehicle did Shirley drive?
She drove the smaller Lexus SUV. It was gray.
No further questions.
Anything further from this witness?
Just briefly, Judge. Over 20 years, you knew Shirley Merritt, correct?
Yes.
And you knew Shirley because of your husband, Richard, correct?
Yes.
And you just characterized it. Richard he treated her as if he was ungrateful, correct?
Yes.
But I guess at the same time, likewise, I guess, didn't you treat her as if you were ungrateful also?
Didn't I treat her as if I were ungrateful of her help?
Because you benefited from all this help, correct?
I did benefit from all this help, but I always thanked her. I didn't fight with her the way that he did.
And then you were telling us that period right before Richard gets arrested, you said that his drinking had accelerated, correct?
Yes.
Now, you're aware that as a condition of his bond, he was on a monitor, correct?
Correct.
And also a condition of bond that he had a curfew, correct?
Right.
And as a condition of bond that pretty much he wasn't allowed to drink alcohol, correct?
Right.
Okay. And then, so during this time, that year, between his arrest and his sentencing, you see him on a regular basis, correct?
I do.
Because of the kids.
Right.
In that year, you see him, there's no interaction that caused you to say, no, you can't see my kids anymore, correct?
I never prevented him from seeing the children. I didn't want to hurt my children by... Right. You're right.
And during that year, between 2018 up until he pled guilty in 2019, he exhibited no actions that made you say, hey, you can't be around the kids anymore, correct?
Right.
Going further.
May the witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Queen?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am.
And Your Honor, maybe some closing be made in the courtroom.
Call your next witness.
Custody calls Investigator Ashley Nelson.
Yes, sir. It's Ashley Nelson. It's ASHLEIGHNELSON.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Where do you work now?
Now I work for DeKalb County Medical Examiner's Office.
All right. And how long have you worked there?
2.5 years.
What are your duties with the medical examiner's office?
I investigate death scenes.
Okay.
I take hospital calls, funeral homes we work real close with. Sometimes I'll assist with autopsies.
Okay. And previously, before you worked there, where did you work?
DeKalb County Police Department.
Okay. And how long did you work there?
About 3.5 years.
What were your duties with the DeKalb County Police Department?
Answering calls for service, appearances in court, obtaining warrants, that kind of thing.
Okay. In February of 2019, what were your duties then?
Answering calls for service, 911 calls, the same, going to court, that kind of thing.
Were you what's known as a patrol officer?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And were you working on February 1st of 2019?
Yes, sir.
And that afternoon, were you on duty?
Yes, sir.
What were your duties that day?
I was a patrol officer. I was answering calls for service. I was working what's known as the 540s in Tucker Precinct, which includes Smoke Rise.
Okay. And what is a CAD?
The CAD is the program that we use for our 911 calls. It shows up on our computers in our cars, and it displays the notes and call times and everything.
Okay. And Your Honor, at this time, the state would tender in States 8, which is the CAD and the business record certification for the 911 calls from February 1st, 2019 and February 2nd of 2019.
Any objection?
No objection.
Admitted.
Investigator, what is a welfare check?
Welfare check is where we go to a residence or a business and we check on loved ones or even property we've checked on before.
Okay.
You're listening to the trial of Richard Merritt from the Hidden Killers podcast on the True Crime Today network. Press subscribe now and get ad-free episodes by upgrading to our premium experience through Apple Podcasts. More next.